Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution, and Putin, Xi Jinping, and the mighty BRICS nation gives a humiliating defeat to Trump and them Zionist flunkies. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. The humiliation has got to be recognized. It's going to hurt our pockets and our wallets. But Xi Jinping has let Trump know there will be no negotiations about anything till you remove the tariffs. And you will not ever be able to dismantle BRICS. Let's get into the content. Salute.
Started before our guest comes on, we have to talk about the blunder after blunder that Donald Trump has really just admitted defeat to both China and Russia as the global balance of power shifts decisively against U.S. unipolar domination. From backing down on the trade war to Vladimir Putin now declaring that Kursk is fully liberated with support of North Korean forces, we are witnessing seismic shockwaves across the geopolitical landscape. BRICS is going on its own kind of offensive. And to break down these historic developments, we have very special guest, friend of the show, journalist, geopolitical analyst, Pepe Escobar. Pepe, thank you so much for joining me, just back from Shanghai and Hong Kong. How are you doing?
Yes, great, Danny. It's a pleasure to be with you. Yes, I flew back yesterday against my will, but I need a little break here because I'm on the road. In 3 days, I'm back on the road again. So I'm back in Bangkok to relax after an absolutely mind-boggling 2 weeks in Shanghai and Hong Kong. And I just noticed that you also have. I just noticed. Professor Zheng Wei gave me a copy. Yeah.
I look forward to seeing. I know you met with him. I look forward to seeing him.
It was fantastic. We did a seminar together in Fudan University. It was fantastic. Amazing. Well, we'll talk about that, of course.
Yeah. Well, let's get started then. Let us talk about Donald Trump's very haphazard economic war on China that has ostensibly ended already in defeat. I wanted to pull up this transcript of a Time magazine interview of Donald Trump's first 100 days. And I'm just going to scroll down to the section where they talk about China because I find it to be incredibly informative. So here we go. Of course, he's been wondering when he's going to get a call from Xi Jinping. So they ask him, will you call President Xi if he doesn't call you? Trump says no. You won't? He says nope. Has he called you yet? Yep. When did he call you? He's called, and I don't think it's a sign of weakness on his behalf. But would you think it's a sign of weakness if you called him and then no real answer? But this is what he had to say. What did Xi Jinping say? So Trump says, if people want to, well, we all want to make deals, but I am this giant store. It's a giant, beautiful store, and everybody wants to go shopping there. And on behalf of the American people, I own the store, and I set the prices. And I'll say, if you want to shop here, that is what you have to pay. And then, of course, they ask about Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent about how this trade war is unsustainable, Pepe. And he says, oh, I agree. You mean the way it is now? But then he goes over to this. The current moment they had to clarify with Trump. And he says, well, no, it's not sustainable. They won't do any business here because at 145% tariffs, it's going to be very rare to see business. So, Pepe, please, your reaction to what has been a real ignominious defeat on the part of the Trump administration with its economic war. And what did you learn on your trip to China regarding this?
Long revolutionary salute to our Quinn by Capricorn for the donation to the war chest. Revolutionary way of life. Appreciate the love, Queen. Salute to you.
BRICS, anything that you want to talk about regarding this economic war, please. Let's hear it.
Well, if you ask anybody across the global majority, do you want to shop in that big store in the US? 98% of the people are going to tell you no. Shop for what? There's nothing to buy. And what there is to buy is imported from basically China and Asia. So, but that's Trump. We're talking about, we're not talking about reality, first of all. We are talking about reality show. And we are talking about narratives and interlocked narratives that change, as he twists his fingers. He doesn't even remember what he said 5 minutes ago. So that's, and what was fascinating, one of the most striking things in Shanghai, by 3 or 4 days in Shanghai, everybody that I was talking to across the spectrum, business people, academics, people at Guanxia, the best website for news and analysis in China, people in the streets, people living in model quarters, those residences during Maoist era, and organized by the local party, with that lady in the party taking care of the entrance, all that. And obviously, they are very, very curious and eager to talk to foreigners, because for a long time, Shanghai, because of COVID, and then after Omicron and lockdowns, etc., was isolated and self-isolated as well. And it was fascinating to see that how they look at Trump really as a giant circus ringmaster. They don't put it this way, of course, but this is how they see it. And the way he has been mocked across those zillions of platforms on social media, not only Weibo and TikTok, but there are countless platforms that most of them I never heard before, going back to China, like basically mocked as the emperor of tariffs and as a circus clown, essentially. And then when you start talking seriously with academics, for instance, and you start to read the analysis of some of the best professors from Tsinghua, from Renmin University, from Fudan, most of them published at Guanxia, and the analysis are absolute. They know exactly what's going on in Washington. They know what's going on around Trump's circle. There was an absolutely fabulous essay. I linked to it in my last column, my second column, which came out yesterday. It was published originally in Cultural Horizon, which is probably the #1 influential cultural magazine in China. And they analyzed the triangulation at the top of the new administration of Trump 2.0. And they break it down beautifully. They break it down as Trump basically trying to constitute a super establishment, not the old East Coast, New York, Manhattan-based establishment, and the old families, the old American aristocracy, let's put it this way. Money politics around Silicon Valley, where, of course, Musk is very important, but the most important character is that extremely dangerous Peter Thiel. And, of course, the articulation of the new right around J.D. Vance, which, as we all know, is a Peter Thiel creature. So they know exactly what's going on, Danny, and all of you, our audience. So this idea that the U.S. think tanks, and unfortunately, for professional reasons, and maybe with you, Danny, I receive a lot of crap on my inbox from all these think tanks for years, They have no idea how the Chinese read Washington critically and in depth, in a way that is absolutely impossible for these self-described and so-called China experts at these various think tanks simply cannot understand, for instance, how the Politburo works, how Xi Jinping made.
Revolutionary salute to our brother Vincent Brown for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Appreciate the love, family. Salute.
Takes his decisions. What's behind really these key concepts of the China dream, community of a shared future for mankind, rejuvenation of China. They simply don't understand what they mean. And you have to crack the code to understand China. These people are incapable of cracking these codes. So what do you have? You have stuff like, I'll give you an example. I bought this thing in Hong Kong. Of course, you cannot buy this book in China. It's Oxford University Press. And it's written by two Oxford scholars who live in the UK for a long time, for decades. Obviously, Rhodes scholars, MI6, all that crap. From the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, which everybody knows is basically an MI6 vehicle. And they try to do, and if they speak Chinese, they write in Chinese, but they still cannot crack Xi. And in the end, the so-called analysis is, he's building a totalitarian state and he's posing as the ultimate dictator. Because he wants Xi Jinping thought to be as important or even more important than Mao Zedong's thought. And this passes for analysis by top Oxford scholars. So it's a joke. But the other way around is serious. And of course, and the Chinese analysts, they do not underestimate American power. They try to understand how the system works, which is a sign of intellectual honesty from their part, and to try to enlighten their readers on, look, our enemy, because now it's the enemy, the system works like this, and this is what they want. And after these conversations, and for instance, talking with Professor Zhang Weiwei that you met, Danny, he's fantastic, not only because of his experience, the fact that he knows the West very well, but how he conceptualized the concept of civilization state and applying to Xi Jinping thought, let's put it this way, and how do they merge and all that. This is so sophisticated, but on a level that completely escapes US think tank land. And when you mix these cultural analysis with the economic analysis of some of the best Chinese economists, so they know exactly what they're doing. There is a consensus around the Chinese response, the official Chinese response, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, by the Minister of Commerce, which, by the way, a few days ago, in the beginning of the week, they said, no, there are no talks whatsoever. Basically, the Ministry of Commerce of China is saying that Trump is propagating fake news. Of course, in a very Chinese, very polite way, they say, no, this is not true at all. There are zero contacts. So this, let's say, is slightly more polite than that famous one 2 weeks ago, when I was in Shanghai 2 weeks ago, when they started to describe Trump as a barbarian. And that went viral all over the net. And the official definition, this one came by one of the spokesmen of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A tariff-wielding barbarian cannot expect China to pick up the phone and make a phone call. And this went mega viral. And on the net, on the social platforms, you see mockery, but with lots of sense of humor. Almost Trump turns into an endearing character because he's so outlandish that they actually become affectionate towards him, you know. But to see all that live in front of you is an enormous shock, because all through these years, starting from the 80s and the 90s, when there were the four dragons and China was behind, and then after the entry in the WTO in the beginning of the 2000s, and then growing at 14%, and then the beginning of Xi Jinping, Chinese policy and Chinese foreign policy was very polite, was mostly passive and reactive. But now they are on the offensive. Why? because Trump managed to do, I would say, the impossible, to antagonize 1.4 billion Chinese at the same time. And there's no turning back. Once again, because it's something that all of us who follow China know. You can do anything with China except treat them with disrespect. And the way the tariff tizzy, let's put it this way, was interpreted everywhere, starting from the DD taxi driver all the way to the Politburo, is that, he treated the Chinese nation and Chinese people with extreme disrespect. And this cannot pass. This won't stand. So the response so far, it's consensual. Of course, they know the challenges. Xi Jinping, in his 2 weeks ago, he was doing a tour of Southeast Asia. For instance, some of the interlocutors, it's complicated. For instance, he went to Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Cambodia, of course, lots of foreign direct investment from China. In many aspects, you can say that the Cambodian economy is a Chinese colony. You can say that. Vietnam is different. Vietnam, they are always hedging their bets between US and China. And Malaysia, with Anwar, which is an excellent prime minister, very much respected in Russia, for instance, close to Putin, but also respected by Xi Jinping. Malaysia, look, we have to be neutral, essentially. But at the same time, we have to have a common ASEAN position. That's what Anwar told Xi, which is exactly what Xi was telling Anwar. We have to fight this as a group. So when you see that in the ASEAN 10, the #1 trade partner for all 10 members of the ASEAN is China. So obviously they have to fight the tariffs as a group. And some will be suffering more than others, and China will help them, of course. And even the ones who are more independent, like Vietnam, the position fighting the tariffs will be more or less the same. So Trump cannot expect a phone call from China. It's absolutely impossible because of the way he turned this into a sort of mafia operation once again. It's going to be the way I want it, or following the spectacular, misguided Miran plan, the guy who came up with the Mar-a-Lago agreement, basically saying, look, there are two options for all of you, and that from China and everybody else. You can pay the tariffs without complaining, and that's it. And there's no other option, essentially. So what kind of dialogue is inbuilt in all that? It's impossible. But it was great to see live in Shanghai the response from all sectors of society, and at the same time, reflecting their newfound pride of, #1, there won't be another century of humiliation, very, very important, and no humiliation whatsoever, starting with this one, which is they consider an enormous attempt at humiliating China. And at the same time, let's constitute China as, we can say, a sort of vanguard or one of the leaders of a united front. When I heard the first time the term united front, I said, wow, this is Mao all over again, upgraded. Mao was talking about the united front as early as in the late 50s already, especially in the 60s. And also the one that when I heard the first time, was outstanding, Paper Tiger. Paper Tiger is back. And once again, first time that Mao talked about Paper Tiger was related to Chiang Kai-shek, was still in the 50s. But in the 60s, many of us who were teenagers in the 60s, like my generation, we remember Paper Tiger applied by people in May 68 in France, Godard movies, liberation movies in Latin America, the definition of the American empire is a paper tiger. This came straight from Mao, all over. And now they're using paper tiger all over again. Say, look, if they were a paper tiger in the 60s, can you imagine now? So it was fascinating to see these adaptations of Maoist thought and Maoist metaphors and images. So they are doing their homework. They're doing their homework for the past few decades. They're looking at the continuum. They understand how the empire is desperate because of Chinese power. And when you look in front of you at these intimations of especially high-tech finesse, it's no wonder that the empire is desperate. Danny, I went to test a Huawei Mate 70 Pro Plus, which is definitely the best smartphone on the planet. It's absolutely mind-boggling, in fact. But then I was talking to the geek, a wonderful geek girl. She said, look, it's complicated for you to use this in the West. There is a trick. We, among us, we have a Chinese app. We could give it to you. If you download this Chinese app, which is more or less underground, then you can download a lot of stuff, including Google, etc. But it's risky. So that's why for us Western barbarians, it's very complicated to have a Huawei phone operating the Harmony OS system. But when you look at the actual product, I say, look, everybody else, Apple is going to come up with something like this maybe in 10 years, if ever. And of course, all those outstanding SUVs, which when you get inside, it's like you are in a cinema with 4K, completely unbelievable. And of course, everything else. They have now a new high-speed train, 400 kilometers an hour between Beijing and Shanghai, which they started to test this past few days. Orders for their new commercial airliner, a thorium-based nuclear, you name it, everything. So it is very, very impressive, all that. And always comes back to the impotence of the empire looking at all that. Okay, so what are we going to do? Okay, let's tariff them. Let's clobber them.
Yeah, maybe you could talk about what you learned briefly before we move on to the Kursk situation. I wanted to ask you briefly about what you learned about BRICS, because you talk about this war on BRICS.
Yes.
And it really is intensifying in many ways. This tariff phenomenon is one of them. Now, I wanted to just pull up this image because you mentioned in your article that Trump does not hold really any cards. The United States is not holding any cards in this situation. And this is kind of a funny way of putting it. What do you bring to the table, Donald Trump? I made the table. So
I made the table.
So talk about
everything else.
Talk about what you learned from BRICS about BRICS while you were there, because in this war on BRICS, because one of the key things that I've noticed is that China has really put an emphasis on, well, if you're going to tariff us, yeah, you actually don't have the cards, and we have a plethora of friends that we can rely on to ensure our own survival and, of course, forward progress development.
Well, it is a war. Even before the tariffs, we knew from the beginning that one of the planks of Trump 2.0 would be a hybrid war against BRICS, selected BRICS, including BRICS partners. With the tariffs, we know that it's a war against one of the top BRICS, China, many of the partners, many of the members and many of the partners. And it's a war against the global south and the global majority and the emergence of the global majority and a more unified global majority, a united front, to quote Mao and China again, where China is one of the leaders. The other ones would be Russia and possibly Iran, depending on how it goes from now on. So I started a sort of informal BRICS tour, Danny. In fact, it happened by accident, but now it's becoming a BRICS tour because coming back from China, I'm going to Iran next week. And then by the end of next month, I'll be back in Russia. And this will be in preparation to go into the BRICS summit in Brazil, in Rio, in early July. So it is a BRICS tour in a sense. And when I get to Rio, probably I'll have a pretty good picture of how the BRICS are maneuvering their meetings, their preparatory meetings, the Sherpas, the BRICS Business Council, which are people that I plan to talk to when I go back to Russia. Because now the BRICS under Brazil in early July, they have a rare earth style opportunity to politely, in a very sophisticated manner, indirectly, but forcefully respond to the Trump tariff offensive. Because the offensive is directed against most of them and to a great deal of the global south. And this will include how the models that they were testing in terms of alternative payment systems, how they are progressing. I want to see if there is, if it's getting deeper in terms of the unit, for instance, which so far is the best system, completely different and bypassing completely SWIFT. What are the next steps? BRICS Bridge, which was inspired by Bridge, and we have several BRICS members which are involved in it, including Thailand and Saudi Arabia still on the fence, and the Emirates, and the People's Bank of China, very, very important, and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. I talked a little bit about this in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong was very much into Bridge. And China could use Hong Kong a lot if the BRICS decide to amplify a BRICS bridge, which doesn't need currency at all. So all this is progressing for the more or less underground. And of course, there is a problem of time because there are only 3 months before the BRICS summit in Rio. They are going to have only one big meeting per month before early July, which is not enough. So they are fighting against time, but at the same time, they have this extra incentive to come up with something really, really strong, which will be interpreted all over the global south and the global majority as the response of the united front to this circus-like Trump tariff offensive. So there are some auspicious aspects to the whole story, you know. And the fact that the Chinese are now very much geared to be on the forefront and start leading, which they were not until a while ago. This is something that I heard a lot in Moscow, that for the Chinese is more important the Belt and Road, the New Silk Roads, than BRICS. Now, we can say that they are on the same level. Of course, 150 nations all over the world that are part of Belt and Road. There are projects like the South Pacific Maritime Silk Road from the port of Chancay in Peru to Shanghai, which is absolutely outstanding and caught the Americans completely flat-footed in this whole story. For instance, a few days ago, the Chinese sent a very, very important delegation to Brazil to start studying the possibility of building what is called the by-ocean railway from Brazil to Peru and then connecting to Shanghai all the way to Shanghai. It's an enormous challenge, but the only ones who could pull that off are the Chinese. So this is one detail. Another detail, in Central Asia, the Chinese are talking to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan to upgrade a railway from China to Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and then all the way from Central Asia to Iran or Russia and beyond, part of one of the corridors, one of the Silk Road corridors. So this is very, very important. All these moves of interconnected moves, part of Belt and Road, they'll start to pick up speed from now on, and a lot of speed, and a lot of extra Chinese investment. And inside China, they are not worried about the effects because they know that the percentage of trade from China to the US compared to their global trade is very, very small. And in Hong Kong, for instance, 2 or 3 days ago, I was talking about this. Imports and exports of Hong Kong, which, as you all know, is a mega, the port is a monster. And the whole planet imports and exports to Hong Kong back and forth. It's between 3% and 4.5% imports and exports. And most of Hong Kong trade, over 50% of Hong Kong trade, is with China. So even if Trump decides to, we never know what's going to happen. Okay, I'm going to tariff Hong Kong port. It's not a big deal because they will keep doing trade with most of the global south and over 50% with China itself. So they're not worried. And this will also accelerate the integration of Hong Kong with southern China. Very, very important. It's something that the Atlanticist elites in Hong Kong were trying to procrastinate, but now there's no more reason. So the Greater Bay Area, how they call it, Hong Kong, Macau, Zhuhai, and the cities of the Pearl River Delta, all the way to Shenzhen, Guangzhou, this integration, this enormous cluster, now is going to pick up speed. So they are not worried about the short and midterm. And when we look at the high-tech sectors, and then we get to the Made in China 2025 territory, where they are already #1 in 7 of these fields, and soon in the 8th, and for the next 2 or 3 years, they'll be the top on all 10, which was the original plan when they conceived it in 2015. Which brings us, Danny, to the AI front, where we have big news concerning NVIDIA and Huawei. Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, he's terrified that because of tariffs, he's going to lose the Chinese market. And that's why he went to Beijing to say to the Chinese government, face to face with the business suit, look, you're very important. I'm not going to abandon you, whatever happens, etc. Why did he do that? For several reasons. #1, he's afraid to lose the Chinese market. #2, he knows that Huawei is going to take over completely the Chinese market, and NVIDIA will be history in China and in, let's say, in the China sphere of influence. Let's put it this way, across Asia. And now the Kirin, how Huawei's Kirin chip is catching up with NVIDIA very, very fast. This is something I would like to talk about in my next and final column about China, with some details from experts, So this is starting to change the AI front, which is the key technological front from an American and Silicon Valley point of view. So when you put this all together, let's say the horizon for China at different levels is not problematic at all, and they are confident. And this was the most important element, Danny, the feeling of self-confidence reflected in the way they act, the way they talk, the way they look at the future, the way they look at China's relations with the rest of the global south, etc. Resilience, a feeling of resistance. Now we are at the vanguard of resistance against this empire out of control. So when you compare this to China in these past few decades, it's a completely different mindset. It's extremely impressive. You start feeling it, and then when conversations develop, you start listening from your interlocutors, directly. Extremely, I was immensely impressed with that, and the fact that they are proud of themselves, proud of what they've done, proud of what they accomplished, and they are not antagonistic. They are not revengeful. They don't want to, do anything rash vis-a-vis the U.S. They just want to be treated fairly, and they are open for a diplomatic negotiation. This is the key word, diplomatic.
Yeah, and finally, before we move on to the more Russia front, I did want to just I feel like there was just a flurry of developments too that kind of represent this. You had a recent Ipsos poll that shows 49% of people throughout 29 countries, 22,000 adults, say that they believe China will have a positive impact on the world more than the United States. Then you also have recent announcements that Russia's oil exports to China are once again up after a bit of a fall.
Yes.
And then you also have China, along with Russia, really taking the lead on the so-called Iran nuclear question, recently meeting with the IAEA directly. And of course, you had Foreign Minister of Iran, Mr. Ragachi, in Beijing meeting with Wang Yi. And so leading off, and both of them announced a golden era in relations. So you have, again, when we talk about leadership and BRICS' leadership, it does feel like accelerated immensely under the Trump administration. So just in such a short period of time, your comments on this?
Well, I've been defining them for quite a while now as the new Primakov triangle. I'm sure many of you remember the original Primakov triangle when Yevgeny Primakov, the late Russian foreign minister, absolutely brilliant, who, by the way, started as a journalist, as a task correspondent in the Middle East in the good old days, meeting Nasser, Saddam Hussein, you name it. Primakov, in the late 90s, he conceptualized Russia, India, and China as the future of relations across Eurasia. He was ahead of everybody else. Now we can say, over 25 years later, we can say that the new Primakov triangle is Russia, Iran, and China, because of their interlocking strategic partnerships. Three BRICS, three very active BRICS, unlike India, which is not a very active BRICS member. And now on top of it, we have India, Pakistan, which is an enormously fishy story. Very, very fishy, which is something that could be solved inside the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where they're both members. And Russia and China are certainly talking. Can we get these two together so they solve this thing, which is obviously provoked by outside actors? Divide and rule once again, India against Pakistan. And Iran, by the way, already offered their services. Iran is also a member of the SCO. And Arakshi already said, look, we have friendly ties with both India and Pakistan. We can be mediators. They can sit at the table and we'll sit them at the table and we'll be the mediators. Right. But the most important thing is that the new Primakov triangle, in many aspects, because Trump is at war at different levels with the three of them, even if he's trying to solve the war that the US initiated, by the way, the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. But of course, the Trump way, which is a sort of Tony Soprano-like, let's grab a pizza and do a deal kind of solving the war. The tariff war against China. And of course, once again, the threats of bombing Iran if Iran doesn't follow his JCPOA 2.0. So obviously they have their interlocking strategic partnerships. They have the very, very important deal that they signed, Iran and Russia, in late January in Moscow, which is not a military alliance, but it has, as Putin would define it, technical military provisions. They have the fact that even before the negotiations, the indirect negotiations in Oman started between the US and Iran, there were two very important meetings with the Primakov triangle. First in Beijing, and the next one in Moscow. So they are talking all the time, and they are talking all the time on how Russia and China are behind the Iranian position if there is an adult, not breakable by Donald Trump again, JCPOA 2.0. At the moment, we have no idea. At least they are talking, and that's enormous. So obviously, and not to mention the geoeconomic permutations of the relationship inside the Primakov triangle. From the point of view of China, Iran is a matter of national security, and Iran is essential for the new Silk Roads connected to Central Asia, and then Iran as a crossroads by the Belt and Road from east to west. And the international north-south transportation corridor, which is Russia, Iran, and in this case, India, which India should be paying attention to, because from the point of view of India, this is the Indian New Silk Road via Iran, via the port of Chabahar in Iran, which I hope to have a chance to visit in the next few days. And I asked them to try to arrange a visit to the port of Chabahar when I am in Iran. I want to see it by myself. And the international north-south transportation corridor is the chance of India to have more trade, not only with Russia and Iran, but from Iran to Central Asia, Afghanistan, parts of Central Asia. So the interlocked relationship of the Primakov triangle is essential, and they are on the same wavelengths. Very, very important. They are meeting personally practically every week. Next month, we're going to have the mega summit in Moscow around the May 9 Victory Day parade between Putin and Xi. And Pezeshkian is going to be there as well. And Lula is going to be there as well. So this is a pre-BRICS summit in Moscow next month. So that's the, once again, the auspicious, in a Chinese sense, aspect of it all, that they are talking all the time. And obviously they are talking towards the nooks and crannies of building the multi-nodal, multipolar world. That's where we are.
Yeah. Oh, indeed. I mean, it has been incredible to watch, because it does really seem like, and from, I think people are underestimating this, that with all of these flashpoints, as you mentioned, Ukraine, Iran, and of course this economic war with China, there is this convergence. You have this unity that you mentioned that is getting stronger and stronger as the United States continues its attempt to isolate and disband them to the point where it seems like these policies are actually just bringing them together even further and accelerating that process to heights that I didn't think it was going to be this fast. Your final comments on this before we move on to Russia?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. So your final comments on this before we move on to Russia? Did you hear me?
No. I didn't catch it. I'm sorry. Let's go to Russia. Well, these past 2 weeks I was totally into China, so maybe I missed a lot of stuff.
Well, we can pull this up. It's actually big, and I think it really. So I think this really ties into the BRICS theme, even though maybe the party here that is the most shocking about this announcement. So for those who aren't aware, Russia has announced that it has fully liberated Kursk. And in a message by General Gerasimov, he said this: soldiers and officers of the Korean People's Army performed combat tasks shoulder to shoulder with Russian soldiers repelling the Ukrainian invasion. They showed high professionalism, resilience in battle, courage, and heroism. So long, and I know that this tie into the BRICS theme, because I think we are seeing, even though DPRK North Korea isn't in BRICS, we know that BRICS has kind of formed almost an umbrella over the DPRK so that it can survive economically, especially. But for so long, we were told that North Korean troops, they're there. And, Russia said very little. On the day of liberation, Russia announces this while there are these negotiations with the United States going on, and Russia keeps pounding Ukraine to the point where here's what Donald Trump had to say, Pepe, on his Truth Social. With all that being said, there's no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities, and towns over the last few days. It makes me think he doesn't want to stop the war, maybe. Just tapping me along, and has to be dealt with differently through banking and secondary sanctions. In my opinion, Pepe, people say Trump is playing 5D chess. I think Russia and BRICS are playing the real chess here as they navigate this situation. What's your take on this, given the liberation of Kursk?
And it's this narrative that he's worried about soldiers dying in Russia, in Ukraine this way. This is beyond BS. And obviously not a word about Palestinian civilians dying by the tens of thousands, victims of his buddy's genocide. So this is, and the whole global South sees through it. Absolutely. And obviously he doesn't know what's really going on. Russia does not bomb civilian targets. So this is, once again, he's being fed misinformation by silos at the CIA, at Pentagon, his own National Security Council, etc. So it's bullshit, once again. The fact that Trump, as we all know, doesn't read. His attention span is 10 seconds maximum for any issue. He doesn't pay attention to anybody. Very few people actually get his ear. He doesn't follow geopolitics. He doesn't read geopolitics. He doesn't understand geopolitics. He's not a strategist. So it's basically a off-the-cuff intuition here and there, or something that he dreamt at 3 a.m. awake in his bedroom. He tries to turn this into a policy. So it's never a policy because it doesn't have a beginning, and usually they have no end. They are, floating bubbles. So it's very complicated to deal with that. And of course, his compulsion to basically completely dominate the news cycle on a daily basis, and preferably on an hourly basis. So the whole news cycle, and theoretically the whole diplomatic movement all across the chessboard, is always subordinated to something that he said, the most outrageous thing possible, or that he publishes in his social media, and everybody reacts to it. So in terms of controlling the narrative, nobody does it better than him. But that's about it. Controlling the narrative doesn't mean he's controlling geopolitical and geoeconomic processes. They are extremely complex and that escape him completely. So that's a completely different thing, So in terms of it's like if you are a one-man band and you have one hit single, and that's it, and then you erase. This was the history of most of pop music so far. That's his case, and he doesn't have a string of hit records at all. He doesn't even know what a hit record is. Otherwise, he wouldn't have listened to his three stooges who sold him on the idea of the tariffs: Navarro, Besant, and Miran. We can call him the Three Stooges now.
Yeah, and from my view, Pepe, with Kursk especially, this big announcement of Kursk liberation, it's just another example of what I think is the Trump. People thought the Trump administration was coming in almost like peace through strength. It's coming in with strength. It was going to reverse things regarding U.S. foreign policy from the Biden era. But from how I see it, is that a lot of Trump's approach to all of these questions relating to this war on BRICS it's almost a foretold conclusion. With Russia in particular, maybe you can comment on this. He's taken a softer posture toward Putin and to some degree, and then making threats on others, in my assessment, because what else is he going to do? Russia, through announcing Kursk liberation, made it very clear that it is ready to make even more advances. It's winning.
Yeah.
And so what else can Trump do? So your thoughts on this, especially
be less incoherent, Danny. Be less incoherent. There's absolutely zero coherence on anything he says, publishes, and 10 seconds later backtracks, you name it. So we should never forget that he's dealing with rational actors. For instance, this blah, blah, blah that he's talking with the Chinese go on the record right away, say, no, it's fake news. He's lying, essentially. The blah, blah, blah about a ceasefire, the Russians don't say anything. The Russians are extremely reticent to react to speculation. They deal with facts, and they wait. When there is a fact, Peskov relates the facts. Or in the case of Gerasimov today, he was relating a fact. We liberated Kursk. So anybody that follows he doesn't even to get into the detail to explain to the rest of the world, look, NATO and MI6, they thought that they would use 76,000 now dead Ukrainian soldiers to get a piece of our territory. Look what happened to them. That's the subtext of Gerasimov reading his press release. And Iran, the same thing. Iran said, okay, we can negotiate, but if our rights and our national security is respected. This is essentially what Khamenei wrote in his letter to Trump. But on the other side, what do we have? We have this non-stop circus, literally, So it's extremely difficult to organize a diplomatic environment conducive to practical solutions. It's already a miracle that the indirect negotiations are going on between Iran and the US. So we can give some credit to Witkoff. Very good. As we can give him some credit in terms of his talks with Putin, because Witkoff is a lawyer, Putin's also a lawyer, they can talk legalese. And so they found probably a mechanism to understand each other. And of course, Putin knows that Witkoff is whatever Trump wants to tell him, Putin, he's telling through Witkoff. So that helps as well. But it's not a traditional diplomatic negotiation, especially when you know that one of the sides, Trump, he has absolutely no clue about the reasons for the SMO and the background leading to the SMO. Not to mention the Kafkaesque absurdity of the empire of chaos who initiated the war in the first place, now is mediating between Russia and Ukraine to finish the war. It doesn't get more Kafka than that, right? So in terms of a rational geopolitical discussion, we are in a completely different territory. Nobody knows really what this non-stop circus is leading to. Especially because now in foreign policy, he's fighting on three very, very, very complex fronts. And there's no evidence that he can deliver in any of these three. Let's say that the least complex, it's extremely complex, but he would have a chance if, and apparently it's starting to, he's finally admitting that Crimea is Russian. This is an enormous step.
Yeah.
So the next step will be to admit that Donbass is Russian. We're getting there little by little. After that, then okay. So assuming we freeze the whole thing in the line of contact, and the Russians already said, no, we don't want a free, we want a long-term solution. Then the real negotiation will start, revolving around what will be the real status of Ukraine. In Trump's mind, okay, this is like, could be light years away, you know. He doesn't think around these terms. He wants a piece of paper saying, we got a deal. It's not going to happen. And the Russians already very politely are telling him via Witkov, no, this is the beginning. And the beginning includes normalizing our relations. Ukraine is just a piece of the enormous puzzle, which is nuclear issues, spheres of influence, you name it. But can you imagine trying to impress this to Trump in 2 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes? Impossible. And of course, with China, forget it. He blew it from the beginning because of his procedure, his non-method, blew the whole thing. And with Iran, he will have to, Witkov has to tell him, look, if you keep threatening to bomb these guys, these are very rational actors. You know, you're not going to get your deal. Forget it. Especially because they know that you broke the first one. What makes them think that you're not going to break the next one? So he is at a disadvantage in all three of these fronts. And when you add, Danny, which is something that you know well, you are in the US, his internal enemies, then it gets even more complex, the whole thing. So in a sense, after three months, his presidency is already besieged from all sides.
Yeah.
And he doesn't work. He doesn't work well when he's besieged from all sides, as we all know.
Well, what's interesting is that Donald Trump will often say one thing and then say another thing. So in this plan that has been supposedly leaked, some people call it the Kellogg plan, the plan that says there will be de facto recognition of Crimea, as you said, big step, or at least a step that is in the right direction. De jure recognition of Russia's control of the territories in the Donbass. However, while that's a step, it doesn't recognize that they, that's a part of the Russian Federation, recognize that they have military control for now. But what he's saying now, after the Pope's funeral, after he met with Zelensky on the sideline during the Pope's funeral, he's saying that, no, it's absolutely unacceptable that we'll ever recognize the Donbass as part of Russia. So there's always flip-flopping. But I think one thing I want you to comment on this, though. The significance of the DPRK, Russia, first of all, announcing that they were participating in these, in the Kursk liberation. What is the significance of this? Because for me, this was an astounding announcement from Russia that I think really underscores where the world situation is right now, and just how important Russia and BRICS and the multipolar world view their partnerships, to the point where we're seeing this is an outright military alliance now that we know that it is 100% true that the DPRK was standing side by side with Russia.
And it's very Russian, Danny. They never advertise these things. All of us are observing. We suspect there's something going on, and then one day they announce that yes, it's happening. But they announced at the last minute, when it was already a fait accompli. Yes, we liberated Kursk, and there were North Koreans. Of course, these North Koreans were not in the front lines. Everybody knows that. They were in the back. They were advisors. They were learning, but they were there. So this implies graphically military collaboration in a war front, direct military collaboration between Pyongyang and Moscow. It is enormous. On one hand, it's predictable. If you go to the Vladivostok Forum for the past few years, you knew that a lot of stuff was brewing in terms of closer collaboration between North Korea and Russia. And one of them, military cooperation as well. So now we're seeing some of these results. There'll be others as well. But that's the difference. The Russians don't need to blah, blah, blah. They're very discreet. And when they announce something, something that already happened.
Yeah. And talk about the alliance. Maybe we can begin to close up, because
no, it's not an alliance.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about, because it's being
very
framed
important.
as that. Actually, let me just pull up something really quick before you comment, because there's a lot of freakouts just in general about not just the DPRK situation, as we've known in the Western media, just constantly talking about how the DPRK and Russia are working together in Kursk. Now we know that's true, but of course, the freakout was very intentional. And then you also have, even around nuclear negotiations with Donald Trump and the presidential administration is committed to, there is still, the Foundations for Defense of Democracy. You mentioned earlier these think tanks. This is a literal State Department think tank headed by Mr. Asher, a hawk of the highest degree, been in the State Department for years, decades. Our friends in China, Russia, Iran, and China jointly meet ahead of negotiations. And in this, they talk about how this is all about a reminder, along with North Korea, that China, Russia, and Iran are members of an emerging axis of aggressors whose common and collaborative cause is to diminish American power and forge a new global order they seek to dominate. So this is what we're getting. But for me to see Russia say that DPRK, yes, was with us in this fight, was a strong message, a huge message, I think, to even the entirety of the collective West that's been a party to what Putin and Gerasimov both said was neo-Nazis trying to take Russian land and being defeated in the process.
Danny, these FDD imbeciles, they don't even know what really happened. Russia, China, and Iran sent their representatives at the IAEA to tell Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, now you have to do what you should be doing from the beginning and act like a political and technical liaison to explain to the Americans what should be done if there is a JCPOA 2.0. This is what happened. So to qualify this as axis of aggressors, it doesn't even qualify as stupidity. It's lower than stupidity. Well, what do you expect with from think tanks like that? But of course, from large sectors of the Beltway, the new axis of evil is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And now, wow, now it's in front of them. So next stop, where? They're going to conquer Berlin again or Paris? Oh, gosh. It's too stupid. No. I think I'm getting too old for this shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just, I think what we're witnessing in your final words on this as we get ready to head out is we are witnessing the Trump administration came in and attempted to approach the most important players of BRICS with various means of hostility, with, of course, coercion. Coercion, and even the negotiations. We know with Russia, we know that there's a lot of baiting and switching and attempts to impose certain conditions that are unacceptable to Russia, which is why they've gone the way they've gone, which is they've gone smoothly, but with very little in the way of concrete implementation of any kind of new policy. So all in all, we see that but most concretely with Iran, with Russia, with China, and now Russia, we're seeing this attempt really flail and fail on the part of the new U.S. administration, which, for all intents and purposes, while it definitely doesn't look the same, we are seeing this war on BRICS blow back in the face of the United States. And I'm curious on your final thoughts on where you see this going, because you are studying this so deeply and going around the world, traveling and understanding this better. Where do you see this going as we move post-Kursk liberation and into the BRICS summit? How do you see Donald Trump's and the United States' overall direction?
Well, it's interesting because this what's been happening gave me an extra reason to start believing that this BRICS summit could be something really groundbreaking. So coming from China, going to Iran, and then back to Russia before going to Brazil for the summit, I think would be essential to get the big picture among the BRICS, the big BRICS. For the next few days, all of us will have to understand what's really going on between India and Pakistan and who caused that. Of course, we all suspect who caused it, but the implementation was very, very shoddy. And the fact that both India and Pakistan are falling into the trap is also very, very worrying. They're both members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. One of them is a member of BRICS, and one of them has a strategic partnership with China in the Belt and Road. So this is very, very, very serious. But the next 3 months before the summit in Rio, probably they will originate extra headaches for Donald Trump. Because if the Chinese, with their newfound united front mentality, really start working hard to agglutinate the BRICS into a common geoeconomic position. For instance, there have been rumbles from China from yesterday to today about an IMF reform. They haven't talked about this in quite a while. Suddenly, they're back on it all over again. And of course, what they're going to do in terms of counteracting the tariffs. So everything is at play the next 3 months. They will be essential. And we could arrive in Rio in early July in a situation that, okay, now it's clear. It's the sole empire on one side, out of control, against 80% of the global south and the global majority. So the clash will be, frontal. And then we're going to start a new era. For the moment that we are at the interregnum, it could veer any other way. Or Trump could have an excess of rationality. Don't count on it, of course.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. I know, Pepe, it's a late evening for you.
So let me start first, Carl. I want to start with, first of all, just your assessment, your update, your intake as to where the U.S.-China trade war is going, given what's going on now with Mr. Trump sort of lying about having a conversation with the Chinese. If you allow me first to play a clip, I'm going to play a clip here. That's something you posted on Twitter, because I follow you on Twitter. And I'm going to share, and I'd like to have your take on this one here. This clip, by the way, guys, it was posted by Carl on his account, and I follow him on Twitter there. So I just kept it here to share it with you. Take a listen here, guys.
近来，美方不断是有消息称中美之间正在谈判，甚至将会达成协议。请问您能否证实双方有没有开始谈判？
这些都是假消息。据我了解，中美双方并没有就关税问题进行磋商或谈判，更谈不上达成协议。这场关税战是由美方发起的，中方的态度是一贯的、明确的，打奉陪到底，谈大门敞开。对话谈判必须是平等、尊重、互惠的。
Wow. I don't speak Chinese, but I can just get a sense of how measured the word and how straightforward. And this one has to do with Mr. Trump lying about, oh, we are having a conversation with the Chinese. What do you think of all this, Carl? Why will Trump lie about something of this magnitude like this?
Well, what Trump administration is trying to do right now is they're trying to calm the market, so to speak, after they have almost intentionally cratered the whole U.S. stock market. Now, if people remember back in the days when Trump first announced his Liberation Day, terrifying everybody, there are people posting on Twitter saying, "Oh, this is such a four-dimensional chess move by the Trump administration because the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he's he's a guy from George Soros' quantum fund. He knows what he's doing. He's really what he's trying to do is he's trying to crater the stock market intentionally. This is when the stock market was in free fall. $1 trillion have been wiped out from the U.S. stock market. They say, oh, it's all part of the plan. He did that intentionally in order so that to drive all the money from the U.S. stock market into the U.S. bond market, because traditionally U.S. Treasury and U.S. dollar are seen as kind of the last resort, the last haven, right? So people understanding is like when you sell stocks, then you put the money you get from the selling the stocks into the U.S. bond. And they say it's such a genius move because United States, as we know, U.S. is in chronic deficit. Currently, I think the national debt is something like north of $36 trillion.
We crossed 37, Carl.
37.
Just a few days ago.
So there's no way U.S. can gonna repay that debt anytime soon. So what U.S. government do is they borrow new money to pay off the old debt. So when the old U.S. Treasury became mature and when you have to pay down the debt, they go to the market, the bond market, to borrow more money in order to finance the old debt. So they said, what Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is trying to do, he's trying to drive all the money into the U.S. bond market. So you will bring the interest rate, the bond interest rate low. So when U.S. By this year, by the way, U.S. have $9 trillion worth of national debt that's come due. That's
correct.
So they have to pay that debt. So they have to borrow additional $9 trillion to pay the old debt. So they say it's such a smart move if Scott Bessent managed to drive the interest rate down. So then U.S. can borrow more money, but at a lower interest rate to pay off the old debt. It's so smart, right? But things didn't go as they planned because after the stock market nosedive, the bond market became broken because somebody is selling the bonds like crazy. And the bond yield, rather than going down, spiked. So the interest rate is going up. And that's when the when the Trump administration came, they came back and announced 90 days, like extension. They say, well, we're just kidding about placing tariff on the rest of the world. It's really about China. We're just aiming toward China. So because China retaliated, the tariff on China stays. Everybody else get a 90 days reprieve until we figure out what's going on and in which time we can negotiate new deals. So Japan, Japanese representative took the opportunity to meet with them in Washington.
Yeah.
And when the Japanese delegate asked them, okay, so what is it that United States want? They reply, "What's your offer?"
which is logical question. Yeah, what do you have to offer?
Revolutionary salute to our queen. I ask kids for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, queen. Salute to you.
And the Japanese are like, we're just really coming to Washington to find out what you really wanted out of us, and then see how far we can meet down in the middle. At the end of the day, there was no deal. The Japanese came away with the impression that the Trump administration do not know what they really want, and this is the case across the board. So now, and the next thing they said was Biden said, well, actually, Biden spring a trap on China. See, we tell people don't retaliate, and you will be rewarded. See, now all these countries are lining up to negotiate with us, and we are giving 90 days reprieve. But the Chinese tariff stays on. But then they say, oh, it's really a 4D chess to form an anti-China coalition to get all these countries on our side. Well, Japan just announced that they're not going to go along with that. Japan publicly announced that they will not follow U.S. on implementing anti-China trade measures, because for Japan that would be suicide. They're already getting hurt in the U.S. market because of the previous tariff. The thing with Japan is they actually came to U.S. They were ready to come to U.S. before, like, for a previous tariff, for the auto tariff, because Trump slapped 25% tariff on all foreign imported auto and auto parts. So Japan was already ready to make a concession on that front, and then they get slapped with more tariffs. So from their perspective, the Trump administration not serious. These are not the people that can have a deal with, because they would just keep on slamming you with tariffs. And so they say, no, we're not going to follow along with your anti-China initiative. Now, this is Japan, a U.S. military occupied country that have traditionally always go along with U.S. no matter what. So if Japan is not going to go along with the U.S. anti-China directive, then forget about any other countries. Even Europe at this very point is negotiating with China
with the Chinese,
on removing trade barriers between EU and China. So Trump, in effect, he has made China great again. I mean, he made China even greater. David, I used to come to your show and say we're already in Asian century already.
Yes, I remember that.
Trump administration come along and said, F that, F the Asian century. Let's have an Asian millennium. Let the Asian millennium start, because that's what the Trump tariff essentially did. Now they're driving everyone to to reach trade deal agreement with China, because they realize, oh my God, China is actually the world's strongest economy, because they're actually the ones that produce everything. Unlike what Scott Bison has said, he said, oh, they're the producer, we're the consumer. That means we have the upper hand because they need our money. Chinese need our money. Look, money is fungible, right? They can always find new market. They can always create new demand for consumption. But guess what? You are not going to recreate a wholesale supply chain within 4 to 5 years. That's just not possible. That's true. This is what U.S. is facing right now. They're cutting off the entire Chinese supply chain, and there's no replacement for that. You know, when 80% of the antibiotics used in US came from China, majority of the pharmaceutical ingredients come from China.
Yeah.
What are you going to do in the next year and a half? You know, before new supplies can be found, replacement found, what are you going to do? You're screwed. This is why the market have reacted very negatively to Trump's tariff. And their whole gambit about bringing the interest rate down, forget about it. That you know, bond cratered, US dollar dropped, and then they very quickly just backed off. This, you know, there's always people used to say, what is United States? Is it really a country or an economy? It turns out it's neither. It's just it's an interest rate. United States is an interest rate. When the interest rate spiked, the Trump administration panicked and backed off. And that's exactly what happened. And the interesting thing was, it was not China who sold the U.S. bond, because China, as we remember, they are the second largest holder of the U.S. Treasury. You know, they still have like 700 billion worth of Treasury. But look, for now, it looks like it's come from the Japan side. You know, Japan, they've been the number one foreign holder of the U.S. Treasury. And what happened was, for decades, you know, the Japanese government have kept their interest rate low. You know, because they've been printing a lot of yen. You know, Japan is the one who invented quantitative easing, right? They started doing that since 90s after the Japanese asset bubble bursted. So they have been printing a lot of money, deliberately keeping the interest rate on Japanese yen very low. So what these hedge fund people do, they thought an opportunity for arbitrage. They're like, okay, we can get a lot of yen for very low interest rate. Let's just borrow a shit ton and let's invest in the US dollar denominated asset where you can get higher return. So this is called the yen carry trade, which can carry on for like over 20 years. And what happened recently is that the Japanese yen has strengthened. The Japanese interest rate is going up. And a lot of these hedge funds find themselves owe more money than they had borrowed suddenly. Suddenly they have to repay back way more than they have borrowed. So they're panicked. They panic. And what do they do when they panic? They sell. They sell the U.S. Treasury to pay back their borrowing in Japanese yen. This was what caused Trump administration to cave. And China, throughout the whole thing, they didn't do anything. they have, you know, raised their tariff, matched the Trump tariff up to 125%, and then they say, you know what, anything above 125% is ridiculous. It's meaningless because, you know, at this point, essentially, there's no direct trade between U.S. and China. So Trump administration, you guys do what you want. We're just going to ignore any further raising of tariff on your side. And that has been the Chinese position. And their position has been very clear from the beginning. They said, trade war is bad for both sides. There's no winner in trade war. We do not want a trade war. But if it's a war you want, we'll fight you to the end. But our door is always open for talks, provided the negotiation must be based on mutual respect. And you know, and then the Chinese Commerce Ministry just added that U.S. must first remove unilateral tariff before the talk can begin. So, you know, there is no negotiation between China and U.S. I just saw one of the big accounts, Zero Hedge, on Twitter, who is circulating a rumor that somehow the Chinese trade delegation is in Washington in secret, blah, blah, blah. That, you know, there would be photograph of the Chinese aides outside of the Treasury Department, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is how disinformation plays out on the internet, because, you know, right around this time is the regular scheduled meeting of G20. Of G20. Wow. So the people are the G20 is scheduled to meet at this time, and guess what they're discussing? They're discussing the negative impact brought on by Trump tariffs. So this is what you know, what's really happening. But you know, all the Trump supporters are posing this as China is finally buckling, bending the knee. You know, so much winning for the Trump side. There was even a account, I forgot the name. I quote tweeted it. He basically said, you know, mark my word, by China will bend the knee by the end of this month. Bookmark this. So I quote tweeted. I say, any updates? Any updates? And then people are like, oh, there's still 6 days left in this month. Hold your horses. Still 6 days left. This is where we are. We're in comic hour, David. We're in complete. All this problem is completely self-inflicted. As I said times and again, majority of the U.S. problem is self-inflicted.
That's true.
That's true. This just epitomizes the whole dysfunction we have right now. We have this whole, you know. But you know what? Some people did benefit from this because we have observed a lot of insider trading activity, especially before Trump's announcement on Liberation Day. There's a lot of people who place a lot of call on the market. You know, like people are selling shorts, and those people are making shit tons of money. And I bet they're buddies, maybe with Scott Bison, maybe they're buddies with some insider. So the U.S. politicians and their cronies were always going to make out like a bandit in this. So they're the ones that's benefiting from this, not the 360, 70 million Americans or people around the world. This is how the game has always been played. You just have to understand the U.S. government is by the oligarchs for the oligarchs. and that's has always been the way it is.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I want to go back to 3 points before we move into because I need to have your insights about the recent trip of President Xi to Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. I remember just remind the community when we had Einar Tangen. He really pointed out to the fact that like what you explained about the bond market regarding exactly what the Trump was doing, and that's exactly spot on. Dr. Warwick Bao also talked about the idea how this is going to go and makes it hard for the U.S. regarding this supply chain. So, and I remember one of our avid viewers by the name Lock1970. He did mention and spot on that, which what you mentioned, Carl, regarding the refinance of the $9 trillion that is due in June. Because here is the problem. So what would happen if we can't pay that or refinance it? That's going to become a big problem for us. And this is what exactly most Americans have no clue about where this is headed. And that's why I believe the Trump is lying about the meeting with the Chinese. We are in talks. That's all lie, because I read the transcript from different locations because the Chinese never called Trump or never reached out, because this is why I use the term strategic and economic defeat. I know some people didn't get the gist of why I titled this interview that way. It's because, to me, with what you explained, Carl, is that China has handed now a strategic defeat for the Americans. That's the way I see it. I could be wrong, but the way I see it. Let's talk about the President Xi Jinping's recent trip to Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. I'm gonna play a clip for you, please, and for our community also, in both in Chinese and the English version. And I'd like to have your take on this one exactly, because I sensed that the wording was very, very, very specific for a reason why President Xi mentioned this one. So take a listen, please.
两国隔海相望，传统友好跨越千年。马来西亚谚语讲：“勤勉不息，日久成山。”建交50多年来，在双方共同努力下，中马关系坚如磐石， 历久弥坚，已经成为政治上互尊互信，经济上互利共赢，文化上互鉴共促的亲密朋友和伙伴，给两国人民带来实实在在的好处。2023年，我同总理先生宣布共建中马命运共同体，开启了双边关系新的历史篇章。
China and Malaysia are neighbors across the sea. We have a friendship that spans over 1,000 years. A Malay proverb says, little by little, it becomes a hill. Over the past 50 plus years, since we began formal diplomatic relations, we have worked together and built a relationship as solid as a stone and only getting stronger. We are close friends and partners. Politically, we respect and trust each other. Economically, we enjoy mutually beneficial cooperation. Culturally, we learn from and invigorate each other. This relationship is benefiting our peoples in real ways. In 2023, Prime Minister Anwar and I announced that we would build a China-Malaysia community with a shared future. A new historical chapter in our bilateral relations has since begun.
All right. What do you make of this, Carl? Because the wording to me, even though this is a presidential visit and so forth, but I noticed that President Xi had to address the social, the cultural ties between the two countries and refer to the historical ties that existed over 1,000 years for this. What is really the message President Xi was sending not only to Malaysia, but to the whole Asian society or countries for that matter?
Well, China is right now, not simply rising. China is re-emerging as a great power, and it's re-emerging. It's coming back to its historical role as an important economic powerhouse for its neighborhood and the rest of the world. I mean, the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, if you really think about it, it's nothing. It's a restoring of the ancient maritime Silk Road ties, and that runs through Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia do have 1,000 years old trade ties with China. There's a lot of cultural, economic ties that goes way back, and even Singapore, who is traditionally a Western outpost in Southeast Asia, has come out publicly criticized United States on the Trump tariff deal. The whole of ASEAN is what China has been focused on, because China, people need to remember, China has been preparing for this moment since 2018, the first Trump term, when Trump first level sanction against China. And so China has been prepared. While all the U.S. think tanks have been talking about decoupling, we need to de-risk from China. China had been quietly building foundation to decouple and de-risk from United States. And by the one way to do that is reach out to the countries outside the U.S., outside the so-called international community, which is U.S. and its vassal states, and to branch out to global South, for example. This is why in the last 5 years, what we've seen is ASEAN has surpassed United States as #1 trading partner of China. This is why Xi Jinping is going to Southeast Asia right now. This is the most important region economically for China. And whereas U.S. has always been the one that's pushing for countries to take a side, either U.S. or China, China's approach is very different. It's we're here to do business. As long as it benefits both us, we can do a deal. And this is a preferred method by most of the countries. If you look at all the anti-China sanction pushed by Trump or Biden administration, you actually require U.S. to coerce to force its allies to cut off trade ties with China. For example, they did that with the chip sanction under Biden, which means Taiwan semiconductors can no longer sell to their once largest market, mainland China. That means ASML, a Dutch semiconductor equipment maker, can no longer sell to their largest market, China. It means the Korean and the Japanese suppliers are now limited from their largest export market, China. And those are all to the detriment of the U.S. allies, right? Whereas the Chinese approach is, let's just do business. I mean, the contrast couldn't be more starker. It's night and day. And what China is doing is also, it's now the Chinese supply chains are branching out. They're branching out of China. Well, I already talked about for example, Vietnam. In case of Vietnam, China and Vietnam, they're building railway links. And one reason Vietnam is gonna, benefit greatly from the Chinese supply chain going out is its physical proximity to China. It has all these linkages to China through railways, through ports, but Vietnam also have a very similar government to China. People tend to forget about that. Vietnam is also a communist country ruled by the Communist Party of Vietnam, and the two countries share very close cultural and cultural economic ties, and their government structure is also very similar. So even though Vietnam and China has some differences, has some historical differences, but the governing party of both places are very eager to work together and to overcome these differences. And this is why U.S. dream of somehow making Vietnam a linchpin of their strategy to contain China is just a fantasy. This is because Vietnam actually benefits from its physical proximity to China in terms of getting a lot of the relocation of the Chinese factories to Vietnam. Now, this is why U.S. now is trying to force other countries to give up on their China ties, but that's just impossible because Vietnam, they would very much like to continue to export to the United States, which is one of their largest export market. But in order to make that happen, in order to manufacture these goods, they source a lot of components, machine tools, like everything else from China. Like this is basically Vietnam became an extension of the Chinese supply chain. That's what's really happening, and this process is it's not something that can be easily rolled back at this point. And this is why Xi Jinping received a big welcome in Vietnam, and Vietnam for the first time they publicly acknowledged the Chinese role in helping Vietnam during the Vietnam War to resist American aggression. This is something that was not talked about before, but 300,000 Chinese PLA soldiers went into Vietnam during the Vietnam War. They acted as the air defense over bridges and railways that linked Vietnam to China. So that's why, despite American carpet bombing of North Vietnam, the vital supply lines connecting Vietnam and China was never cut because those Chinese soldiers were there to guard those bridges and railway from American bombing, and they're also the ones who repair it quickly after the bombing was over. So this helped Vietnam achieve their victory over America. Now Vietnam is publicly acknowledging this. This is also another sign they're signaling the changing in the relationship between the two countries. And then Malaysia has been very friendly with China for decades. Even though Malaysia also do have maritime dispute with China in South China Seas, but Malaysia and China were able to put aside their differences and developing a full-on economic cooperation, and which benefits both countries. And I went to Malaysia in 2019 and early 2020. I saw a lot of Chinese investment in the country, and and there's going to even more is coming. There's a lot of tourism, and so these ties are only going to further develop. This is regardless whatever United States does. But what Trump actually did is pushing these countries even further toward the China's camp, and this is why rather than picking up the phone and call Washington, Xi Jinping's first priority is to visit Southeast Asia, because now ASEAN is China's #1 trading partner, will continue likely to be the case for the coming decades. This is good for China, and this is good for ASEAN, because there's going to be a lot of development. And if you look at what U.S. is actually trying to impose on the Southeast Asian countries, now some details about the trade negotiation between U.S. and Indonesia are being leaked out. Indonesia was one of the first to send trade delegation to Washington to negotiate a deal, because according to Indonesian Finance Minister Sri, she said, we wanted to be the first, so hopefully to get on the good side of United States. But instead, at that time, Indonesia pledged to increase their import from United States to 19 billion, which will include buying the U.S. jet fighters, I believe F-15. And
wow, an old one, an old model.
And they're gonna buy. They pledge to buy U.S. Oil, liquefied petroleum gas, soybean, and wheat. Especially at the time when China had announced they after China raised 125% tariff on U.S. import. That means China is not coming to U.S. to buy the liquefied natural gas from U.S. anymore. China is not. Is gonna go turn to Brazil or Argentina to buy soybean and wheat. So Indonesia offered to buy more of those U.S. products, but instead, this is in the very very early days of Trump's Liberation Day statement, when U.S. announced 35% tariff on Indonesia. But after Indonesia made those offers, U.S. raised the tariff to 47% on Indonesia. This was after Indonesia was making all these willing concessions, and only later, when the bond market freaked out, did they back off and say, "Okay, we'll put a 90 days extension on those." So, and in their trade negotiation with Indonesia, they're talking about. So first they're talking about the trade deficit, and then they talk about so-called non-tariff trade barriers. Now, this is very vague. It could be anything. And one thing that U.S. want Indonesia is to change its local payment system. Indonesia now has developed a local mobile payment system using QR codes. A lot of the Indonesian vendors, you just scan the QR code with your phone, and you can pay. I mean, this is. I noticed this when I came to Bali in 2019. Before I only saw this in China. And then now it's very popular in Indonesia. When you go to restaurant, whatever, you just scan a QR code and you order, you pay. It's very, very simple. But United States trade representatives said, no, that's a non-tariff trade barrier to United States, because we want you to use MasterCard and Visa instead. Because this Indonesian national standard for QR payment is a barrier to entry for the U.S. MasterCard and Visa finance companies. Again, this has nothing to do with manufacturing. This has nothing to do with bring manufacturing to United States or reindustrialize United States. It's all about imposing control of U.S. finance and U.S. capital over the Southeast Asian countries. So why would Southeast Asian countries accept that? Why? Whereas China is not coming in and say, we don't like your QR code. You need to switch your Alipay or WeChat Pay. That people will cause an uproar. And by the way, I just recently I was in Thailand. I was in Bangkok. the QR, the mobile payment there is also very popular. Like even street vendors. If you, I was walking along there like a very busy like kind of CPD district of Bangkok, and they have all these like street vendors who come out during breakfast hour to provide like quick lunch or breakfast for the office workers, and they all have like little QR code. You can scan and pay with your phone.
Yeah.
Everybody has it. Like it's very simple. It's like US is the one that's kind of like stuck in 1999, and everybody has already moved on to the 21st century. But US is saying no, we don't like that. We want you to use MasterCard and Visa, so our finance companies can exploit your local market. Like why would people accept that? And especially when now there's alternative, which is China. It turns out, yes, US has money, but guess what? Money can be created very easily, very quickly, very easily. And there was a time in during when China's real estate bubble bursted. With Rio Grande and a lot of the foreign investors were screaming at the Chinese government for creating new stimulus. You got to stimulate the economy. You got to create stimulus. But Chinese government held the line. They did not offer new stimulus back then, which means they have kept their powder dry. Now they have more room. They can, if they want to do actual stimulus to the economy, to offer more. And Chinese people, they know how to make sacrifices. I mean, there's a Chinese phrase called 吃苦, which literally means eat bitterness. I mean, the eating bitterness is kind of embedded in the Chinese psyche. I have parents who lived through famine, right? And when I grew up in 1980 China, sometimes we have meat maybe like 2 or 3 times a week, right? Wow. This was not that long ago, man. 1920s, that's like 1980s, that's like 40 years ago, right? And so there's still generations of Chinese who have memories of the past hard time. The current hard time, the sacrifice they're going to be asking to make by the Chinese government, guess what? It's going to be, okay, you got to take more vacations. You got to spend more. you got to buy more television. You got to buy more cell phones, right? I mean, that's nothing compared to what they have experienced in the past. By contrast, it's Americans who are probably not ready for the pain they're about to experience, because, like I said, China has been preparing this since 2018. United States, they really seriously misjudged China because they thought China would just bend the knee, like they say on social media. They think China would just accede to whatever Trump's demand is. No, that's not going to happen. Like the whole the Communist Party of China's claim to legitimacy was ending the century of humiliation. The last thing they want to do is want to see them bend the knee, back like the Qing dynasty, to accede to all the unreasonable foreign demands, and that's not going to happen. So China will not bend on this, and anyone who understood China would knew this. But of course, a lot of the advisors from Trump administration, apparently they have been imbibing way too much of their own propaganda, right? They're all reading from the likes of Gordon Chan, right, and Peter Navarro, and they think Chinese economy is slowing down, it's collapsing.
It's going to collapse.
They're going to have to come to us. They need our money. Like that's just not what I saw when I visited China recently. I mean, this. But anyway, this is I'm done with my rant.
And we're gonna talk about your visit. Actually, I want to go back to one point you mentioned about when the real estate bubble bursted at the time. I made an argument back then, Carl, and it's on the record right there. There's a video out there that I argued back then, and it was in response to a question. And I argued and I said, "Mark my word, the Chinese government is not going to bail out those companies. They are not going to do the same mistake we did with the GFC." And everybody was like, "Well, no, they're going to crash the economy." I said, "No, They are not going to do that because those companies are going to have to be held accountable. And China's government will not want to drag itself into something like this. And here we are. That was bad, and it became clear to me that's what's going to happen. Now, let me go back to the point of the visits of the ASEAN countries. I know for the Vietnam is a big deal because we're talking about the supply chain. And even I heard a briefing by Tim Cook, the head of Apple. Yeah, I heard it. That is like forgetting about the Chinese market. You guys gonna be out of your mind if we think we're gonna have to move the operations elsewhere. And his argument, Carl, was about China sort of possess the key stuff that Apples need. For example, the brain power. Because when you deal with this chips and all that, this is not for an average Joe. The second thing is the location, the manufacturer where they are. The third thing has to do with the tooling, because you need specific tools for the chips and all that. China has all this in one location, and this is why Apple is saying, no, we are not going anywhere else. And my question to you, Carl, which makes me just think about, why did President Xi didn't visit Indonesia part of the trip, knowing that the Indonesian market could also play a role given where ASEAN is moving forward?
Well, Xi Jinping did place a call with the Indonesian president, Prabowo. It is kind of sometimes interesting on the reading the tea leaves. Why did Xi Jinping go to Vietnam, Malaysia, but not Indonesia? Right? Indonesia is one of the biggest countries in the ASEAN, world's fourth most populous country, just after United States. But I think it could be many things. One thing is Indonesia is in the midst of its own negotiation with United States. This might complicate things if Xi Jinping was seen visiting Indonesia, so this possibly to give Indonesian breathing room in their own diplomatic and trade negotiation with United States. Because Indonesia definitely is still very important in terms of Chinese outward going investment. China is still the top foreign direct investment in Indonesia. I don't know exactly, I don't have a direct line to Xi Jinping's inner circles, so I can't tell you exactly why, but I just throw out educated guess here. Like one, you could be like mutually understood by Chinese side and Indonesian sides. Like, okay, Indonesia was kind of caught in a rock and a hard place, because they have been under a lot of pressure from United States. Currently, Indonesia, they depend on United States for a lot of their export, especially in like low-end manufacturing, which is what Indonesia has been focused on in the recent years. So they really wanted to keep the channel of export to United States open. But that doesn't mean Indonesia is is gonna wall itself off from China, right? Because I just don't see that happening. There's BYD is currently opening a factory here. There's more Chinese auto manufacturing that's coming to Indonesia. Like Geely is already coming, and there's other Chinese manufacturing that looking for possibilities of either entering the Indonesian market or opening start local production. So Indonesia remained very important, both for its it's for the fact that it's the biggest country physically, it's the most populous country in ASEAN, and it sits in a very strategic neighborhood. So I expect there will be follow-up of diplomatic missions to Indonesia later. A lot of these things will happen under the table. Like we will only find out, much later. But right now, again, because Indonesia is in the midst of trying to reach a deal with United States, so I'm just guessing this is probably just to give Indonesia more maneuver room vis-a-vis Washington.
Yeah, well, that's a possibility. To me, it was just one of those thinking outside the box. Makes me just, okay, maybe there is something there. So I figured just to ask you. Now, while we're still on ASEAN, there are some conversation right now. I've been talking to some people who sort of have an understanding of where ASEAN is headed moving forward, economically speaking, and the impact it's going to have in coordination with the Chinese regarding the global economy. There is one. Yeah, go ahead, Carl. Go ahead.
Just so because since you brought about Tim Cook and Chinese supply chains, there's a news that just came out that Apple is going to move. They're going to seek to move their iPhone production for United States to India. So India currently already manufacture somewhere between 14 to 20% of the iPhones. So what Apple wants to do because of trade tariffs. So what Apple wants to do is they understand they can't move all the iPhone production line out of China. That's not possible in the immediate future. So they're going to try to move just enough to India, so make India supply the U.S. market. So which means everybody in the United States, all the Americans will get made in India iPhones, while everybody else in the world will get regular iPhones made in China, right? So because of the tariffs, and the thing is, I don't think in terms of manufacturing, there's a lot of talk from particularly Anglo media, like The Economist said, India is going to be the biggest winner out of this U.S.-China fight because they're going to get all these manufacturing moving there. I will argue ASEAN will be the biggest winner, actually, because China will win the fight, but the ASEAN will come out, ahead of India because because the geographic proximity to China. And this is also China. It's not just United States, but it's also China driving kind of the move into Southeast Asian countries. The Chinese government is actually encouraging Chinese firms to invest in Southeast Asia, and the Chinese factories are moving there on their own. So they will be a lot closer to the Chinese supply chain. Whereas there's already a report that they said it seems that Apple's move to shift more production to India has met some obstacles. According to some report that some Chinese suppliers of iPhone, they were told they can't sell their products. They can't sell their product to Foxconn factories to China. So they had to do like roundabout way. They set up an intermediary subsidiary in Southeast Asia to purchase those parts, and then they ship those parts to Foxconn factory in India. So anyway, it's never about bringing manufacturing back to United States, folks. They're not bringing iPhone manufacturing back to United States. So we're just talking about they're going to shift a portion. Apple is going to shift a portion of manufacturing to India, but even that portion still depend on Chinese machines, Chinese equipment that need to be sourced from China. So this is where ASEAN has a great advantage because they're sitting on China's doorsteps. You don't have to go very far to get those Chinese suppliers and Chinese parts. And this is why I think countries like Vietnam and even Indonesia will have much better chance to move up the ladder in terms of manufacturing than say India, because India is just too far. It's just too far from China. And also ASEAN, there's also the closer economic, it's also the cultural factor. ASEAN as Xi Jinping said, there's 1,000-year-old interaction between maritime Southeast Asia and China. So both for cultural reasons and geographic proximity, ASEAN is going to come ahead in this game.
Yeah, let alone that the business setting in India, it's not conducive for, I mean, we all know how it is with the infrastructures. And are you going to trust the Indian government? Because they're going to be hammering the foreign companies with some sort of taxes, whatever way they do it. So that's interesting enough that tomorrow I'm going to be having Jayant Bhandari, and I will be asking him this question specifically about this one. Let me go back.
Great choice.
Yeah. He's somebody I trust. Jayant doesn't hold back, and that's how he ought to be. He doesn't sugarcoat things. Let me go back quickly to this before we jump to the next segment here, Carl. While on ASEAN, as I said, there was some conversation regarding whether Philippines needs to step out of ASEAN because it's some sort of dragging ASEAN down. Is there some logical argument into something like this? What do you think?
Well, Philippines is kind of the sore thumb sticking out of ASEAN at this point because ASEAN, they have been very, ASEAN is all about diplomacy. It's about inclusivity, right? Like ASEAN literally included all the Southeast Asian nations. But one of the things, for example, regarding the South China Sea dispute, ASEAN has been quietly working with China, to table the dispute to focus on development. But Philippines, ASEAN has like a code of conduct regarding South China Sea. But Philippines has been bucking the trend, right? They're the ones who are now willing to be the U.S. proxy to stir up a fight with China. And this is not what the rest of the ASEAN member want. But I don't think Philippines will be kicked out of ASEAN. It's just that what Philippines has done, other ASEAN nations are taking notice and they don't like it. And I mean, like, not the fact that they don't like it, they're barely disguising the fact that they really don't like it. Because really, the diplomacy in ASEAN and Southeast Asian countries, they like to keep everything under wrap. They want to keep it behind doors, the talks behind doors. You don't see a lot of the public, the leaders accusing each other in public because they prefer the quiet democracy, the behind door, more honest, frank exchange behind the closed door. So don't drag the fight into public. But now, even in more public arenas, the ASEAN countries have many officials have pointed out, Philippines is not what Philippines has done is not contributing to the stability of the region, right? Which is because the whole South China Sea conflict has been weaponized by the United States as now it become a flashpoint. That's not what other ASEAN countries want. They rather to deal the issue on it, on the merit of it itself. Do not get entangled with definitely not be a proxy for United States. Everyone can see what happened to Ukraine, right? The whole the region got wrecked. That's the last thing ASEAN country want to see is a war breaking out in the region. But Philippines, it's a tough case because they have a very entrenched oligarchic class that's been ruling the Filipino people for their own interests, not for the interests of the Filipino people, but for the interests of these oligarchic families who are ruling them. And right now, the last time we had sort of saw kind of independent foreign policy was under Duterte, and now they're putting a kibosh on that. That's why Duterte is been sent to ICC, and the Philippines is trying to impeach the vice president, Duterte's daughter. So yeah, it's very unfortunate because the Philippines, they have potential, they have great potential. It has 100 million people, just like Vietnam.
Yeah.
But now they're even lagging behind in terms of manufacturing behind Vietnam. They have been offering a role in the U.S.-led globalization as like call centers and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
AI is going to replace a lot of those call center jobs, and so and the Philippine leaders are not far-sighted enough to really to try to work for the future. This is very unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, the same argument has been made about India inside BRICS. And I'm one of those that have been arguing that for the presence of India in BRICS, it's just useless. It was never fit to be as part of BRICS, which we will talk about BRICS as we move forward. I need to tackle one particular point here, Carl. And this one has to do with China launching the CIPS, the China cross-border interbank payment system, the equivalency of now, I read a little bit on it. I didn't dig deep yet. The one thing that sort of caught my attention was two things: how fast it goes and the cost in comparison to SWIFT. For the SWIFT, it takes about 3 days to clear, but the cost is high. For the CIPS, it's faster within few seconds, if not within few minutes, if not seconds, and the cost is very, very low. How do you see this moving forward in reshaping the global financial system, in your opinion?
This is kind of like just like U.S. and China in general. I mean, like U.S., there's a lot of legacy ways, in U.S. that has been the norm, established norm, but it's so entrenched. Everybody uses, but you had to put up with it. But even though it's really slow, and China has been able to leapfrog by adopting latest technology and actually innovate. And so this is the story that's rolled across all sectors, not just terms of finances. I think the Chinese system has a lot of potential to grow. Because the de-dollarization trend is going to continue. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to continue because especially what Trump is doing, it's really accelerating the trend. And now, as we see, dollar and U.S. Treasury is no longer the last resort. It's no longer the last haven to store your wealth. So while China is not ready to replace the U.S. dollar as you have Chinese yuan to replace dollar as a reserve currency yet, for many reasons. One is that means that China would have to give up the capital control. This is an area I don't think Chinese government is now willing to concede at this moment because there's a lot of apprehension after especially the 1997, 1998 Asian financial crisis. That's when the U.S. capital, particularly by people like Scott Bessent, the current Treasury Secretary of the United States, when he was part of George Soros' hedge fund, they preyed on the Asian currencies. At that time, they led attack against the Hong Kong dollar, right? Because the Bessent was the one who famously raided the Bank of England, right, and broke the pound sterling. He tried to replicate that in Hong Kong because at that time Hong Kong was just handed over to China. There's a lot of political uncertainty, and it was in the midst of the Asian financial crisis. So Bison and George Soros they thought it was Hong Kong dollar was ripe for the taking, but they kind of underestimate the fact that Hong Kong just had a new landlord, and China didn't want the stability of Hong Kong to be harmed in any way. And so in the end, China told the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, you got to stop this attack. And George Soros found that lost a lot of money when they lost the bet. And I think that's something that they never truly forgave China for after all these years, because this is something they bet big and they lost, because Scott Bison, from my understanding, he's very ideological. He is the one who thought, okay, there's no way authoritarian government, communist government will win against democracies, right? Like, even though he had very little understanding of the Chinese market or how the Chinese economy works, but he's just been an ideological guy that he was convinced, there's no way the Chinese economy should succeed. So right now we I think the key point I'm trying to driving at is the ASEAN will be fine, even with actors like Philippines. Because Philippines is kind of outlier at this point. And China had plenty of experiences dealing with like financial predators like the Wall Street types. And so this is a reason China is not ready to give up capital control and which is basically the only thing stopping yuan from becoming to replace dollar as a world reserve currency right now is because China don't want to. China don't want that to happen, because also make yuan to become world reserve currency means you are going to export yuan to the rest of the world, and then what happens when you export money? You are getting you had to import goods, so you are going to have to accept a trade deficit against the rest of the world, and that's a predicament United States is in right now, because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. U.S. have to accept a trade deficit against the rest of the world, because the United States is essentially exporting dollars and receiving manufactured goods, and this is a system that Trump administration is trying to change, but they don't actually understand how that works. Unfortunately, their solution is worsening the problem, and because Trump still want to keep the U.S. dollar status as a world reserve currency. You have people like our Marco Rubio publicly said, we have to defend the dollar, right? And defending the dollar hegemony, and it means you have to accept trade deficit. There's no way around it, because essentially you're exporting dollar. And what that means, you have to buy goods, right? So this is what China. This is not where China wants to be. This is why, but because China is the world's largest economy, and because like now people are just rather directly dealing with China, the RMB or yuan will be increasingly important trading currency. So this is why CIS has a great future ahead of it, because this was exemplified during the Ukraine war. When Russia was kicked out of the SWIFT system, and that means anybody can kick out of the SWIFT system. So I think CIS will grow in importance in the coming years. It doesn't mean that the dollar is going to lose its status of world reserve currency, but it just means the yuan will be increasingly more important as a trading currency. This is because just for the simple fact that China is the world's largest trading nation, and as people in the United States found out on TikTok videos, all these luxury brands that have been buying, essentially they're still buying made in China goods that would just got slapped with a Louis Vuitton sticker, right?
And being charged so much.
People are just you are all buying made in China goods, but when you pay extra, you're just paying for the brand and the marketing premium. And that's what people need to understand. And so anyway, so right now, what Trump is doing is he's destroying the brand name of United States. It's
Yeah.
destroying the whole brand name and the marketing that has been built up over the last couple hundred years. And now, what's left? What is left?
Indeed. Well, I do believe, Carl, that also for China, thinking strategically, this is why I use the term strategic defeat in the title, because my thinking is that China's thinking long term, and the SIPs will be one of those sort of pathways by which now, because the move, in my opinion, by the Chinese for this one here, it's as clear as daylight. It's its desire sort of to reduce the reliance on the US dominated financial system. And it makes more sense. And not only is going to do that, but it also is going to strengthen some sort of China's own financial dealings, and even, if I may use the term, influence within the region. This is why I'm saying ASEAN, it's going to be the economic bloc where everything's going to have to go through. That's becoming clear to me, and this is why this is going to lead us to talk about the last part of this conversation here regarding BRICS, because I am thinking of both. I am thinking of BRICS, but I am also thinking of ASEAN. And each one of them has its own sort of shortcomings, if I may use the term. But before I'll ask the question on this, guys, if you have any question for Carl, I'll take 2 or 3 questions, super sticker questions, if you have 1 or 2. And I'll take this quick here, if you allow me, Carl. I want to say thank you to Soho for the super sticker. Thank you very much for this one, Soho. And if you, this is too funny, time to face reality, USA. That is correct. You're absolutely correct on this. So there is no other way of looking at it. So now we'll tackle our last, as a matter of fact, before we do this, Carl, can you share your assessment, perception about China when you visited? What caught your attentions? What strikes you as unique there?
So I actually did 2 trips. I spent 1 week in Thailand, in Bangkok, and I spent 1 week in China. And my impression when I went to Bangkok is that, this is indeed an Asian century. This was before Trump's whole Liberation Day announcement. And this was indeed the Asian century because I saw so much development since the last time I was in Bangkok, which was 2002, 23 years ago. There was when I was in Bangkok 23 years ago, I still see rats skirling around the street. I saw elephant in the streets of Bangkok at 2 o'clock in the morning when I went downstairs to buy some stuff from the 7-Eleven. And today, Bangkok is almost unrecognizable from 23 years ago. There's so much more development. They have a very nice metro system, which I took to meet with Brian Berladek on the outskirts. And it was very, very easy to navigate. It's super clean. Their metro is new, super clean. They have these barriers to prevent people from falling into tracks or people getting pushed into tracks, as the case of New York. And it's just super clean compared to New York and Chicago. And people are super polite. It's just a night and day difference between Bangkok and United States. And things are, and there's an emerging middle class. This was very obvious to me in Bangkok. They just have a nice shopping malls like they do in United States, and at much cheaper price too. and what I noticed immediately out of the airport, out of Bangkok airport, is I saw these 3, 4, or 5 giant billboard advertising cars. And I noticed they're all Chinese cars. They're all Chinese brands that Americans probably never heard of. The BYD. They wouldn't know BYD, but they have Geely. They have Great Wall Motors. They have Deepal, which is made by Chang'an Motors in my hometown Chongqing. And I think I only saw one Toyota ad.
know, in Bangkok. Like I saw maybe like one Tesla, but I saw a lot of Chinese EV on the streets of Bangkok. So apparently the Chinese EV makers, they're launching a very aggressive marketing campaign. And when I went to Lupini Stadium to watch Muay Thai fight, and directly outside the stadium, I saw two Chinese car dealership. One is Deepal, which sounds Indian, but it's actually Chinese, by Chang'an Automatic Motive from my hometown Chongqing. And the next one is Volvo, which is owned by Geely, by Chinese company Geely, right? So that's why I call them two Chinese friends. And so the Japanese automakers, they're getting killed in Southeast Asia. This is the traditional stronghold, right? Because before, you rarely see American cars in Southeast Asia, whether Bangkok or Indonesia. It's mostly Japanese. You see a couple European cars, but mostly Japanese. But now the Chinese are taking over, and this is why a lot of the Japanese automakers are in serious trouble. And then they're getting slammed by Trump, because they're now losing out in the world's second largest auto market, which is the United States. The world's largest car market is China, which has sell twice as many cars as the United States. They're already losing out to the Chinese competition in China. They are getting hit with tariff in US, and they're losing out in Southeast Asia. So the Chinese, the Japanese brand days are numbered, and the Chinese are taking over. Now about my China trip. When I went to China, I talked with taxi drivers, normal people. For them, I think the hard time was actually the economic slowdown from the post-COVID hangover and the collapse of the real estate market. That's what they talk about. When they talk about a hard time, that's what they talk about. They don't even think this tariff thing is any of consequence, because people in the United States, they don't understand. Chinese economy, 19% of the Chinese economy is export, and out of that 19%, 15% is to the United States. If you do the math, that's only so it comes out to 3% of the Chinese economy is directly tied to export to the United States. So if you take that out, it's gonna hurt, but there's also a lot of people who will barely notice. The people in the export industry that's specifically catering to U.S. market, yes, those people are going to take a hit. But the rest, the vast majority of the Chinese economy composes of people who will not even barely feel anything from this whole tariff war, because Chinese economy right now is so large. I don't buy the thing that's it's smaller than US or even 1.5 times as large. I think it's far larger, because if you look at the electricity consumption, if you look at the car sales, the number of cars sold in China, it's twice the number of United States. For me, my estimate, just based on these figures, I think Chinese economy could easily be twice the size of the United States already. And most people, and the mood on the ground is festive. I went to the Boon in Shanghai, which is a touristy area. No locals in Shanghai go there. So I know everyone there is local. It's mostly domestic tourists. They're all there to have a good time. And by evening time, the police will have to come out, because the crowd got so large. Because I went on a Friday night. The crowd grows so large at night, the police had to come out to separate to guide the crowd, so they don't have the crowd crushing incident like they had in South Korea during Halloween. But Boon at night was jam packed. Everybody went there to see kind of the light getting switched on across the Shanghai riverfront.
So everyone seems upbeat. Everyone seems unbothered, going about their lives. And from what I have seen in just 1 week there, being Beijing and Shanghai, there's a large middle class in China.
For sure.
People will be shocked, but the size of middle class in China is already larger than the entire population of United States. So by some estimate, the middle class, the population, the middle class in China have already reached 400 million people.
Actually, it is true.
Already
It is
larger
true.
than
I checked that
so-
information,
so-
Carl. I checked it the first time I heard it. I checked on it from different sources, and it was confirmed. The middle class in China is as big as the size of the American population.
And anecdotally, from
Yeah.
my visual, from what I see on the ground, I think I can confirm that. I mean, like
Yeah.
everyone seems happy. They have spending money there. Well, the fact that they're on vacation, right? Everyone seems to be on vacation in Shanghai. And I was walking in the Nanjing Road, which is a busy pedestrian road next to the Boon, and they have a Huawei store. I walk in. One half of the store is like Huawei phone, laptop, TV. The other half is Huawei cars, which, sorry folks, you'll never see in the United States. Those cars are amazing, and they have, one thing they will have is top of the line Huawei software. But I wish I could have. But those cars are only available in China right now. They're not exporting yet. But the Chinese consumers get the best of everything. Not only the economy is growing, but they can get cheaper cars. Like because you visited BYD factory. They were selling like very nice cars for like $12,000. $16,000.
$16,000. That's correct.
For somewhere like 20 for like $24,000 in China, you can get very, very nice cars.
Yeah, the
like
luxury.
Nice
Yeah.
Yes,
As a matter of fact,
yes.
Carl. As a matter of fact, that $24,000. I asked the manager then, and he told. I said, "What makes this car expensive?" He said, "This is considered a luxury, and one of the key features of this car is it's voice activated and it can self-drive. If you get tired, you just give the command and the car will self-drive." I was like, "What? Can I take one home?" And he said, "They're gonna charge you the tariffs."
Yeah. But even out, like even in the countries that doesn't have like tariffs, like United States, as soon as a car leaves China, the price doubles, right?
Double.
I'm actually about to buy a Chinese car here now in Bali. I think I'm trying to wait for BYD to bring their best-selling Seagull to Indonesia, but I can't wait anymore. So I'm gonna buy a Wuling Binguo, and that car. So the top of the line of that brand sells for $12,000 in China, but in Indonesia it sells for like $25,000. It's more than double the price, but I was able to get some discount. And after rebate, I got a $5,000 off. So I still have to spend $20,000. That's still like $8,000 more than what a Chinese consumer would have spent at home. So yeah, like the Chinese people are getting spoiled right now. And you know what? The sacrifice they're gonna have to make in this tariff war is they're gonna have to buy more cars, they have to buy more laptops, buy more iPhones, and more shopping bags. And I think I highly suspect that Chinese government now have room to do stimulus. They can, like money is easy to create, guys. You can just print money. it's a supply chain that's hard to create.
That is true, and that's the strategic thinking. Something we in the United States didn't consider, because we don't think in these terms. We think about the next quarter and so forth. So that is what has been always said. So let's talk about my last segment here before I let you go, Carl, because I can't let you go without asking you this question about BRICS. Now, I'm having my doubts about BRICS moving forward. So I know on papers, BRICS some sort of has the potential to become some sort of a major geopolitical and geoeconomic powerhouse. There is that possibility there. So, because when you consider the bloc has already, the economic bloc that is, has already about 45%, if I'm not mistaken, of the world population, and also generates more than about 37% of its GDP. And this is measured by the PPP, the purchasing power parity. So, and it also produces about almost 32% of its oil. So, but where the problem is, and some analysts have been arguing this as well, that despite this aspiration, and this is what I'd like to have your insights, despite these aspirations to reform some sort of the global system, okay, assuming it can do that, BRICS, in my opinion, lacks the necessary structural power. This is again where I see the problem, to sort of rival what we call the establishment of other international order per se. Do you foresee the upcoming summit in Brazil going to lead to some change regarding the structural? Because here is, you have India, for example. Why can BRICS just ask India to lead? Because there is no mechanism by which they can do that.
Well, I mean, speaking of India, we don't even know what happens. Like in next week, there could be a war between India and Pakistan.
Yeah, and Pakistan.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
like right now, we don't even know what's gonna happen after that. But I think you're right. BRICS is not it's not a military alliance. It's not NATO, right? I mean, it started out as an economic forum. Literally started out as a marketing moniker pushed by Wall Street. I believe it was Goldman Sachs who came up with
that's correct
the terminology in order to sell emerging market stocks in Brazil, Russia, China, India, etc. And if you look at these countries, they have very different systems. The attractiveness of the BRICS is that it offer alternative, because they say, well, it's all about multipolarity. We all respect sovereignty, but at the same time, it's not a really tight-knit group of alliance, kind of the way the NATO alliance was, or even G7, right? G7 is another group of economies, but G7, we all know that's just like US and its vassal states, right?
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it has like half the world population, but that's mostly because BRICS groups China, India, and Brazil together, right? These are the world's top. And now Indonesia, you have the world number 1, number 2, number 4, number 5 most populous countries in the grouping. So of course, but India is pursuing its own independent foreign policy objectives, which at this point seems like it's trying to lean toward United States or the BRICS side, depending on how much to maximize the benefit for it. Which I cannot blame them. I mean, that's what a country leader should do to maximize their own national interest.
Carl, how can they do that? How can they do that when they couldn't negotiate with the Chinese, for example, instead of imposing 12% tariffs on the Chinese steel? Why don't they get into negotiations with the Chinese and figure it out?
Well, because India always have this this kind of thing against China. That's one of the biggest problem in the BRICS alliance is that India do not see eye to eye with China. Russia has for its part, trying to bring India and China together for the longest time, because Russia is friends with both, but it just never worked because and India right now rather work with United States. I mean, a lot of things that's happening right now. The timing is rather suspicious. When Vance, JD Vance is visiting India. I know there is a joke that JD Vance visited Putin and both guys, and he visited India and Kashmir.
And Modi with that.
I know it's a meme, but still, you gotta think that the timing is suspicious. As soon as he went to India, and now the Kashmir attacks happened, and now of course, India is gearing up for confrontation with Pakistan, right? And this all happened, and Pakistan, for people who don't know, the China-Pakistan economic corridor is actually one of the most important project in the Belt and Road Initiative project. So China invests a lot of money to stabilize Pakistan and to build the China-Pakistan corridor. And if the whole Kashmir issue get blown up, is if turn into a territorial war, there's already talks of or India can take over the Pakistan side of Kashmir, and including Gilgit-Baltistan, that where the China-Pakistan friendship highway goes through. So basically, will literally cut off the link between China and Pakistan, right? And also by extension, China's access to the Arabian Sea via land. So right now, everything is in flux, and I think one of the reasons to keep India in the BRICS alliance is you rather keep India close rather than have India to be like a full-blown member of the US-led club, right? You don't want that to happen. So at least you want to keep India close. So you have some leverage. You have some negotiation space by granting India a place at the table. But I agree with your analysis that this arrangement will mean the BRICS will not be the most effective kind of a tool for alliance. It's not because it's only a forum. It's an economic forum. And does it serve as a counterbalance to the U.S. hegemony? Well, rhetorically, yes, but if you delve into the devil is always in the detail. If you're actually looking into what that actually means, it probably doesn't mean a lot. That's where I think you are correct.
That's how I feel, and I've been starting to be convinced about this outcome. So I shall see when the summit in Brazil takes place. I'll keep my eyes open and see what will happen there. So, well, Carl, I can't.
Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. If you're new here, please take a minute now to subscribe and follow my work at worldaffairsandcontext.com, my Substack. I would love to see you there. In the last year, several significant high-level meetings between South Africa and Saudi Arabia have sparked a wave of investment deals totaling billions of dollars in Africa's most industrialized nation that also happens to be a founding member of the BRICS Plus Economic Alliance. But this isn't just about money, it's also about strategy, influence, and reshaping of global economic partnerships. So let's quickly break down how this growing alliance is changing the game for both nations and for the African continent. So since 2014, Gulf countries have poured over $100 billion into Africa, and South Africa is becoming one of their main targets. Why, you may ask? I will explain in greater detail in just a minute, but South Africa is very rich in minerals, and relatively speaking, what's very, very important, its infrastructure and assets are still undervalued compared to global value, so which is effectively the best case scenario for any investor. The abundance of South Africa's natural resources makes it one of the world's largest sources of raw materials. South Africa produces more than 10% of the world's gold from more than 30 functioning mines on its territory. South Africa's natural resources also include mineral reserves of iron ore, copper, platinum, silver, manganese, titanium, chromium, and uranium. South Africa is home to nearly 2/3 of the world's platinum and about half of the chromium. Gold and diamond revolutionized the country in the 1800s and helped strengthen the country's economic structure. First, let me share a quick background on the Saudi-South Africa's relations. So it all kicked off in a pivotal meeting in 2022 between Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and South Africa's President Ramaphosa. Since then, delegations have flown back and forth, trade talks have exploded, and so have the deals between the two states. In fact, more than $5 billion worth of agreements and discussions are already on the table in everything from renewable energy to gas stations, real estate, and logistics. This surge is part of a much larger Gulf drive into Africa, where nations like the UAE and Saudi Arabia are heavily investing in mining, in energy, and in agriculture. Here in the United States, of course, we frequently hear about China facilitating new trade ties and investment ties with African nations that are highly, highly beneficial for both sides. We hear it, unfortunately, in the context of a so-called debt trap. But Western commentators fail to acknowledge Western neo-colonial ambitions on the African continent that still exist, while they denounce other nations' desire to increase trade with African countries, to provide foreign direct investment and, of course, financing at lower cost than any of the Western institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. So in this particular case, why are Gulf states interested in South Africa? The most likely answer is opportunity. South Africa boasts world-class infrastructure, a highly developed industrial base, and top-tier companies, many of which are undervalued compared to global markets. This is, of course, an opportunity of a lifetime that neither the UAE nor Saudi Arabia can afford to pass up. For example, an official at one of the financial institutions, Investec Banks, recently shared there is a disconnect between valuation levels in South Africa compared to other markets. Therefore, investors actually flock there if they really do want to seize an opportunity. Therefore, the South African market is a bargain for long-term investors. Plus, the country's skilled management teams and robust intellectual property give it a really great competitive edge. A spokesperson for South Africa's International Affairs Ministry says that ties have strengthened significantly with Saudi investment growing exponentially. Next month in May, South Africa's trade minister is going to head to Riyadh for the 10th South Africa-Saudi Joint Economic Committee meeting. But despite this apparent enthusiasm, not everything is smooth sailing. Nothing in diplomacy is easy, especially now that a significant portion of geopolitical focus has shifted toward Africa, and the world's great powers, the United States, Russia, and China, are increasingly active on the continent via different channels, of course, be it economic or political and military. So what are the roadblocks to the Saudi-South African relationship? There are many challenges that they have to overcome to expand their ties. For one, Saudi Arabia and South Africa don't have a bilateral investment treaty in place yet, which adds red tape so to speak, for Saudi companies wanting to expand quickly in South Africa. And with oil prices effectively dropping, Saudi Arabia is under some fiscal pressure as well. It's even considering selling off international assets to stay liquid. While I don't think that this is a true concern for the Saudis at this time, who have vast resources at their disposal if needed, it does add an extra layer to an overly complex process of establishing stronger economic ties with new partners in Africa. Still, Saudi's sovereign wealth fund, worth nearly $1 trillion, is already making big moves in South Africa. For example, Bloomberg recently reported ACWA Power, majority owned by the fund, has invested $1.9 billion into 3 renewable plants, with more plans to spend $378 million more on water and energy projects over the next 5 years. Red Sea Gateway Terminal is another important project. They're actually eyeing Durban's massive port with a potential $600 million bid, one of the biggest in sub-Saharan Africa. So it is going to be a huge project, very, very important. These aren't just financial investments, of course. They're strategic footholds. From logistics to energy, the kingdom is planting really deep roots in South Africa, and it's all aligned with Vision 2030, the Saudi Crown Prince's plan to diversify the Saudi economy beyond oil. Earlier this year, Saudi Arabia announced a $41 billion commitment to Africa across key sectors such as mining, renewables, agriculture, and more. What's emerging here is a clear win-win for the countries of the global majority, the global south. It's a really interesting dynamic that will definitely shape the region. South Africa gains much needed capital. It needs trade links that will help expand its economy. And of course, it gains global visibility. Saudi Arabia secures access to key markets, it secures natural resources and future-facing industries. In the world shifting away from oil dependence and toward new global alliances, the Saudi-South African partnership could very well define the next decade of economic growth on the continent. This is absolutely huge for Africa, and it presents, of course, a great opportunity for African countries to leverage multiple actors who are increasingly interested in engaging with the region and more broadly with the continent. So is this the start of Africa's next golden era, powered by Gulf ambition and Gulf oil money? Let us know in the comments below. Of course, only time will tell.
Coffee. Follow me.